Hi, folks. I wanted to take a few minutes this morning and talk a little bit about data privacy and the blockchain. And I want to talk about it because I think there are still some fundamental concepts about spatial computing and smart contracts and responsive environments that people don't understand. And it's kind of like the portable door being run on terms and conditions. And so if you don't understand that the future of Web3 is really the internet coming out of this screen, right, and being laid upon the world in which you live and interact, and it's going to affect your agency in terms of not only things in your home, things in your workplace, if you still have a workplace, your relationships to other people, your car, how you move around, the payment systems, the services you access, all of those things are going to be sort of linked into this Mother May I game board. And so a lot of the folks online, their perspective is that this spatial computing is essentially to sort of flatten you, either kill you outright or eliminate you from the game, or sort of flatten you into this homogeneous substrate and make you a puppet that you can dance to the tune of the controllers, whoever they imagine the controllers are. I have a different point of view because my current assessment is grounded in understanding the complexity and emergence. And so we can have these bigger conversations around control or totalitarianism or centralization or decentralization. A lot of it is because we're trying to apply words that we have to things that we can't actually conceptualize yet. Like we almost need a whole new vocabulary for it because we're talking at cross purposes. And so my contention is in some ways we're all already in a game, right? I got a bunch of books yesterday in the mail, and this is a reprint of Timothy Leary's The Game of Life, which is kind of a hysterical book. It's actually more like a cartoon book, which is weird, but it's linking his 8 circuits of consciousness to the tarot and archetypes, which is interesting. And so we're in a game, right? We've showed up, we're embodied intelligence in a reality tunnel. And now the goal of spatial computing is that there will be more and more layers of gaming opportunities in our various reality tunnels. And then maybe sometimes the gaming opportunities will move us from one reality tunnel into the next reality tunnel. But the cybernetic aspect is that the gaming scenarios, and whether the gaming scenario is what will I have for breakfast? Oh, what do my smart appliances say in terms of giving me nudges or suggestions? And again, this won't always be perceived as punitive. Like there's a lot of the Joe Rogan biohacker crowd who would love to have their personal AI assistant tell them what to eat for breakfast based on their whatever biometric monitoring thing that they've got going on. We're not all the same. And so what's controlling and oppressive for one person may be super helpful for another person. So we just have to keep that in mind. So then the input of what happens after you eat breakfast, and then you get more data and that gets fed into the system. And it's this input-output system, which is the recursive cybernetics. And then that's happening not only on an individual level, but on a societal level. And so this debate about control versus assistance or centralization versus decentralization, I think is somewhat beside the point. Like I'm asking people to actually understand the implications in all of their diverse unfoldings of what it will be like to live inside and outside in robot, which is, if you listen to the short read aloud that I did on the domestic front, it's about a man with a depressive episode who's living in a smart home managed by his smart appliances, right? The sensor-based appliances. And all of this is linked into your digital twin. That's the cybernetic aspect. You have to have a ledger to track all of the interactions and then what happened as a result of that interaction, and then feed it back into the system to optimize for some key performance metric. And so while we spend a lot of time talking about AI, right, in the general, it's allowable in the general media to talk about AI, we don't actually extend that conversation off. It's usually AI is going to eliminate humanity and kill us all, so we have to go out into space or something like that, or turn us into digital twins. We don't really talk about AI interfacing with the smart contract layer, and that's Web3 and blockchain. And that's why people, all these years later, I mean, I've been studying this pretty closely since 2016, 2017. They don't get, like, if you ask a regular person, even a resistance person, like, how do you understand blockchain smart contracts and token engineering? They would have no clue. They would have no clue. And at this point, I think it's starting to sink in a little bit. But if you're here listening to this channel and you still don't get it, I highly suggest you undertake your own independent research study to figure this shit out, because it matters. I'm not here just spouting for no reason. I'm saying get your act together and understand how you feel about it, because there's not only just one way to feel about it. I'm sure that the Freedom Cell people would feel differently about it than I feel about it. But you, for yourself and your family and your loved ones, should think about how you feel about it, and then the ethical aspects of that as it applies to impact finance, social impact finance, and cybernetics. And so all of this is running on data. That's the inputs and the outputs. Now, when I was doing my education work, there were huge issues around data privacy, right? And when I started out, I was really concerned about this perception of tech companies using children for essentially free labor, these free profit margins to stick all these devices, not just the devices, but the software and the cloud computing, and then using children as essentially just objects, artifacts to create profit off of. And I thought that was very wrong, and I still feel that it's wrong. But the conversation is something much bigger than data privacy, because the data privacy conversation, and there would be bad things that would happen, right? Like all the kids' data would be fed into a computer program, and then the company that ran that program would sell to another company that was in another country, and then all the data transferred as an asset, right? And that's a problem. I agree that that's a problem. But generally, we understand that things get broken on purpose, and it's a problem reaction solution. And so 5 or 6 years ago, I could see very easily, as I saw blockchain being offered as the answer, is that we will give you data privacy. We will give you some perception of security, even though often, the things into which the blockchain is attached, the wallets and the portals in and out, are very hackable. So there isn't actually security in that, but there's a narrative of security. And so all of the things breaking with data privacy would feed the blockchain, right? And I kept saying, wait, we don't want children to be agents in this game, in this cybernetic feedback game. I don't think we want children to be these agents, even if their data is supposedly private. Now, to me, the spatial computing and the smart contract, so on the blockchain, there are sensors. They're connected to things like doors or cars or payments or cameras or different things, right? And they are enabled if certain conditions are met. If this, and you can put several conditions on connect together, then this can happen, right? And those conditions mean that they need access to the data. Now, this data can be stored in your digital twin, accessed through a digital wallet, right? It's technically private. And this was my concern when we were going through where there were all sorts of restrictions on people to be able to access certain spaces depending on what kind of digital token you could provide. And at the time, it was a public health related token, but it could be any kind of token. And they said, don't worry, it's private. But the question is, if you need to go to the grocery store and your wallet doesn't have your blockchain wallet doesn't have the token that allows you access into that physical space, I don't give a shit if it's private. I don't care. The issue is I can't get my broccoli, right? Unless it's delivered. And then, of course, that's another data stream, right? Is the food delivery system. And I've talked about how important that is in terms of managing inputs and outputs, and calories and microbiomes and waste to the overall equation. And so it's less about, on the one hand, I don't mean to dismiss harms that have happened because people's data have been leaked or it's been misused, and those are real. But the next level is that maybe it's all kept private, but you can't do what you need to do because of the smart contracts and the tokens, right? Because it's not just about money, it's about the tokens. It's a mother may I game. And that isn't centralized. There isn't one person. Klaus Schwab isn't over the whole world saying yes, no, you. No, it's a network. It's a decentralized network. So you can't even appeal to some authority for there being a problem because it's decentralized. There's no real good resolution. But because of how the narrative has been controlled, right? We talk about AI, but we don't talk about Web3 spatial computing. We talk about data privacy, but we don't talk about how private data on blockchain is integrated into smart sensor technology that affect our quality of life. It's a very, very controlled conversation. And if you followed me, you know I've been trying to crack the door open wider on this for a very long time. And GDPR in Europe, the privacy preserving, legislation, is that. It is to make you an agent in the game. So we're in the game, we're in Leary's game of life, and then there are sub games in the game of life. And what they're pulling off of these games, they don't necessarily want to know Bob Smith and all the specifics of Bob Smith. What they're looking for, in my opinion, based on my research, is something called the wisdom of the crowd. They're looking for consensus. There's a reason why Joseph Lubin called his company with Ethereum Consensus, because it's like this bacterial biofilm. It's multiple sensing using human beings, like Oliver Reiser's The World Sensorium, as sensing interfaces, as tentacles on the octopus, and we're sensing. And then through some radical participatory voting, which is going to come with the blockchain governance, there is some determination of a course of action. And I am increasingly feel like this is connected to quantum computing and the John Wheeler's participatory universe, and pulling information out of the field. And that is why we all need to have a MetaMask wallet. It's a mask. The mask is that they don't necessarily care about Allison in particular. They don't need to know every single thing about me. But within the Holon that I am attached to, or the globe that I am sitting on, or not, if you imagine that we're not on a globe, my location in the game and my presence as an agent, it could be an unnamed, fully anonymous agent, is simply in my data stream and how it interfaces with other people's data streams. And so, yeah, it can all be private. And an idea of having a trust account of your data and control of your data, which is kind of what the GDPR was setting up, is in alignment with this concept. It's not out of alignment. It's just no one actually understands the nature of the game that is unfolding. And I don't fully understand it. I mean, I don't claim to understand all of it, but I understand more than most people talk about, and I can see how the conversation is being controlled. And once you know that Alexander Pentland, Sandy, who was a close associate with John Clippinger on the Open Mustard Seed Digital Identity Systems at MIT Media Lab, and that was 2013, and working in human dynamics and socio-technical systems and social science, computational social science, is a key figure in the GDPR, working with the World Economic Forum. My when we ask, how do we deal with this? I would rather not deal with it within their terms and conditions to fit myself to this world of spatial computing run on logic layers and tokens. I would prefer to question the entire package, right? Why are we not questioning the entire package of what it means to live in an outside-in robot rather than to make living in the outside-in robot okay, which is what GDPR is going to do, and make us and give us a trust that we can actually earn income off of our data streams, right? And it doesn't have to be personalized. It can be anonymized. And this was linked to Intel's Enigma protocol. So it is going to be theoretically anonymous. And, when I was listening to that talk years ago, which I wish I could find again, but they said in the future, you're going to be paid to poop in a proper toilet and sleep 8 hours a night. They don't care if it's Bob Smith sleeping 8 hours a night. They just want to know the crowd. What is the crowd doing? And that can be anonymized. And that's what they're after. And so, yeah, they're going to hook your UBI into your data stream, right? And it will be anonymous. It will be private. It will be your stock, right? Your personal stock, your personal brand. And that's when, Nicholas Berggruen, he had that tweet about, we could tokenize people on the blockchain and that as an asset, and then that would underwrite the UBI system. And it's just out there. That tweet's been out there for 2 or 3 years. Are any other influencers out there talking about that? Is the Catherine Austin Fitzes out there talking about that? Like, and how that relates to community currency? Because this is all going to be framed as for your good, for the public good, for the commons. And of course, the commons being the emergent superorganism. It is going to be the moral economy. That's what John Clippinger was working with Oliver Goodenough in Vermont on, the moral economy, because it has to be for goodness. The community banking with the digital banking and the social impact finance and the UBI linked to your data stream will be that. And so I really need for people to sink in and understand the data privacy broken on purpose part is a step along the road to getting to everyone is an anonymous agent in a giant dynamic biofilm, sensing and then feeding information up to some AI pattern recognition system. Like, we are this interface into the field for this something that doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have field access. And then we have to decide if we're going to do that. And it's going to be increasingly difficult to not do that because of spatial computing. I mean, we should be able to not have to live in some sort of crazy off-grid scenario with a well and as a hermit, because we'd prefer not to be part of the blockchain. And we should be allowed to have that conversation as a society now, rather than having our options limited by the conversations we're having on social media. And eventually, I've talked to people and they're like, well, I'm low tech. I have a really old computer. I have a really old phone. But you might not even have any tech. You might just have a laminated QR code like the MyPass people and homeless people in Austin. But you still have to go and interface with somebody that has the tech. And, right now, I don't have smart appliances in my little house. But soon, in the next 5 years, you're probably not going to be able to buy a not smart appliance. And so, yeah, you're going to have a refrigerator that is watching what's inside and sending, building up your personal credit with the data of what's inside your fridge to your wellness community. And again, I would remind you, there's that clip with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saying, oh, we should be able to underwrite alternative power sources in California and by, controlling smart appliances in people's homes. Just like we might, as electric companies, invest in hydroelectric dams, we should invest in smart appliances, right? Bobby said that like 10 or 12 years ago. This is coming. This is here, and we're not talking about it in a robust way. And people are still asking me, like, can you say it in 2 minutes? Well, can you give me a 15-minute thing? Well, could you give me the 3 books that'll tell me how? No. Like, I'm sitting here reading, these are my books I got yesterday. The Game of Life, Gaian Systems, and Hazrat Inayat Khan's Mysticism and the Sound of Music. Because they're all interrelated if you're a rhizomatic thinker, which I am, evidently. So we have to, when we're theorizing solutions, you actually have to understand the nature of the problem as deeply as possible. And I will admit, I know enough to know that there are new wrinkles to this unfolding scenario that I am not yet aware of. So I'm not saying I have all the answers, but you have to educate yourself enough to engage with it appropriately. And sometimes that means walking out of your reality tunnel for a while and looking around. Because sometimes the way we have to start talking about these problems can't be contained in the reality tunnel you're occupying. If you understand this all as some sort of financial system or colonial system or something else, you're not going to get it because this is a world situation. If you want to say, oh, Allison doesn't understand geopolitics. This is a Gaian system, people. Yes, at one layer, there's all of these geopolitical things happening and all of the game board, the gaming is the geopolitical gaming is going on. People know how to play the geopolitical game. They know what team they're on and where they are and the state of play. They don't know about spatial computing. They don't. For the most part, they don't. And so I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to pull up my Kumu map with Sandy Pentland, and I'm going to pull up his bio so that you can see about computational social science. And again, there's like a whole new department of that at Penn. And Penn is a major node in this emergent system. So, Deloitte, Pentland, all of these people were talking about your data as an asset, as a trust. And so if what you imagine is that you're going to use the existing laws to create a trust to protect you and your data, and you perceive that the threat is that someone is going to, access your data inappropriately, what I'm saying is you're going to have to agree to give the data up. You might have to agree to give the data up to open the smart lock on your front door. It's going to be in the terms and conditions. When you buy that smart refrigerator, there's going to be some fine print at the bottom about how it works. And a lot of these smart technologies are going to be coming and subsidized, I believe, by the government, maybe by venture capital, through the insurance companies and the HMOs, just like in the domestic front. Your smart toaster brought to you by your HMO. There's maybe a reason why Humana is one of the big ones. So, this is just what I'm trying to communicate this. It's broken on purpose for a reason. And because of my lived experience, I have about a 5 or 6 year head start on most of y'all. But I didn't have somebody like me laying it out. And now what I'm giving you is the benefit of my experience. But what I'm saying is I don't know all the wrinkles. And there are some wrinkles that you'll know about because you're on a different part of the elephant. So take this for what it's worth and apply it to your own situation and be willing to question this in your own communities. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the map next. Okay, so here is Sandy Pentland's page on the MIT Media Lab. Alex Sandy Pentland, professor post-tenure of media arts and sciences, and his focus is human dynamics. So he actually helped create and direct the MIT Media Lab and Media Lab Asia. And so he's been very involved in the rollout of Aadhaar in India, which was the early digital identity system. It goes on to say he is one of the most cited computational scientists in the world. He co-led the World Economic Forum discussion in Davos that led to the EU privacy regulation GDPR. Okay, So he's also the father of wearable computing. So if what you're doing is you're seeking refuge in GDPR, you're not back far enough to question the entire game, right? Because you're taking into account that the GDPR is somehow working on your behalf, like as a trust for your data. But the question is, do you want to live in a spatial computing world, a world of computational social science, which is what Sandy Pentland and John Clippinger have been setting up. Let me see if it pulls this open. Yeah, so mobility in a networked world, 2008, 2009. Reality mining of mobile communications towards a new deal on data. And this is 2008, 2009, which is right at the same time that social impact finance got underway. It says that he was one of the UN Secretary General's data revolutionaries, helping to forge the transparency and accountability mechanisms for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And again, that is cybernetic human potential movement towards this Gaia superorganism. Let's see, he's the MIT's Toshiba Endowed Chair. Recent invited keynotes include the annual meetings of the OECD, the G20, World Bank, and JP Morgan. He's a heavy hitter guy, right? He's on the advisory boards for the UN Secretary General, the UN Foundation, the OECD, the American Bar Association. Again, these are people who are, I mean, there were some folks who were talking about the legal recourse, right? But the legal communities are integrated into these systems. That the legal industry isn't questioning blockchain, even though the blockchain systems are likely going to automate a lot of legal services. I think they're involved, but they don't actually understand. A lot of things will be linked to arbitration, and this automated arbitration will be AI and Web3. Member of the advisory boards of Google, AT&T, and Nissan, and a council member within the World Economic Forum, if that matters to you. It says the companies that his lab co-founded included the largest rural healthcare service delivery system in the world. Okay, so that's telehealth. And telehealth includes mental health, and that's psyche, right? He was working on the news arm of Alibaba and the identity authentication technology in India's digital identity system, Aadhaar. And so I'll play a little bit of this video that he talks about social science computation in a minute. But what they're after is mining the bottom of the economic pyramid. They're trying to access the world's poor, largely in the global south. Again, he's giving keynotes to the World Bank. And increasingly, I feel like it is people who are in contact with their land and their deep cultural practice, ritual practice, mystical practice on their land. They are interconnected to the field in a way that westernized culture has been disconnected from that for several centuries. And I think beyond simply profit, racism, whatever, that they're trying to get into those spaces and jump those people into the digital economy to be able to access their capacity with the field. Especially, Leo's done a lot of work around crop insurance with farmers. And so I think that the soil connection, the people of the soil actually have maybe a different computational substrate than people who are keyboard jockeys, that sort of thing. So more recent spin-off companies include Ginger.io, mental health, right? Cogito Corp, AI coaching for interaction management. Wise Systems, delivery planning and optimization. Scylla Money, stable bank and coin. Akoya, secure, privacy-preserving financial interactions. And again, what I've come to realize over walking this road since 2016 on blockchain is that these interactions that masquerade as finance and at one level are finance, and for those of you who are still in the reality tunnel that it's all about money and economic structures, I would say it's another ballgame when you get up to the level of recognizing those as signal coordination within the social organism. And this social organism is this merged consciousness around the globe. And those that signals intelligence, the financial transactions, and that's why they all must be digital, is to get the signal and keep the signal in real time. And those signals guide the morphic field of what is evolving. Okay, so he has 80 PhD students, many tenured faculty at leading institutions. Let's see, he has pioneered computational social science, organizational engineering, wearable computing, image understanding, and modern biometrics. His most recent books are Building the New Economy and Trusted Data. Okay, so data is an asset class. And so if what you want to do is to build your counter proposal to spatial computing on this idea of trusts, personal trusts or beneficiaries, they've already set up that way. And my question within the trust and the beneficiary is there is the individual beneficiary, and then they are going to increasingly set up the commons as a beneficiary, right? The climate conversation is about Gaia as the beneficiary, right? We've seen the connection of giving sort of identities to rivers, to natural systems. And again, I'm not for taking advantage of natural systems, but that is a limiting system, right? When you put a river on blockchain and give it an identity and then have your interactions with that river mediated through tokens, that's a different thing. In my opinion, that's a very different thing than what we have had in culture in the past. So we should ask a lot of questions about that. And then, for those of us who have navigated the lockdowns and all the changes that have come in the aftermath of that, I think we've come to realize that while at some point there are very basic things that we can maybe all agree are for the common good, there's also a lot of other stuff where there are outliers whether something is good or not. Right? There are things that might be good for one person or one community that are not good for another person in another community. There might be something that would be good under certain circumstances, but under other circumstances would be highly questionable. And so this idea of embedding the common good into a logic layer, there's no nuance to that, right? And so I think that that's a problem, and understanding, like, as they set these things up, not only as trust for your own good, trust for the good of your city, trust for the good of your community, trust for the good of the world, that is a narrative game that we have to be mindful of. And it's a narrative game that's woven into the legal system as well. Okay, so yes, interesting experiences of Mr. Pentland dining with the British royalty and the President of India, staging fashion shows, and developing a method for counting beavers from space. Okay, so this is a short video. It's about 3 minutes. I'm just going to play this. This is Sandy Pentland talking about human dynamics overview.
So I created Human Dynamics Group because I was very frustrated with the way institutions work, with the way government works, with the way companies work. They just don't seem to work very well.
And you can see how this would, again, feed into the cybernetic governance narrative that's going to be setting up. Clear the swamp, fight the deep state, make things work better. It's an optimization. If we just had more data and could see the patterns, we could do better with our social systems.
And I came to the opinion that one of the key reasons is we don't understand the dynamics of society, of how people work together. And if we understood ourselves better and how we work as groups, then we could do a better job of it all.
And that's the ant colony. That's the eusocial insects, right? Is if you tagged all of the different agents in the colony, in the anthill, in the beehive, in the termite mound, you would understand how those systems work. And they have been studying this deeply, deeply, deeply at MIT Media Lab for a long time, these bugs, along with, I think E.O. Wilson was at Harvard, but they know how these systems work, right? And so now they're bringing them at scale to human beings.
So what I did is we founded a new branch of science called Computational Social Science, which is now huge and in hundreds of laboratories. And what
So computational social science in hundreds of laboratories. And I'm just asking you, like, we don't understand the game we're in, right? The people who are in those labs understand. I mean, they probably are in a reality tunnel that they're just about making the world better. But it's not commonly understood that this is underway. And this has been going on since the 80s, really. I think about, all the time I spent since I graduated high school, and this has been bubbling up under the surface, but not public. Which is common, because if you think about it, the development in the scientific research communities are probably 30 to 50 years, always 30 to 50 years ahead of what the public actually understands.
What it is it's using big data, things like census data, but richer.
Things like census data, right, Sandy? I mean, that's not real-time data. Real-time data is your continuous blood glucose monitor, is your metabolism that is tracking you as the agent. Like, come on now. And this is what I realized when I was fighting standardized testing was, unfortunately, and this is a hard lesson to have learned, but when I was opposing that system, it was problem, reaction, solution. A once a year standardized test, as punitive as it was and as used in as harsh ways against children and teachers as it was, that was an insufficient data stream for what they're looking for. Once a year is not enough data. Even if you had quarterly tests leading up to the big test, that's not enough data. What their goal was to create educational technology that will, in the not too distant future, include wearables and augmented reality and virtual reality, and the schools as we know them as physical places will be going away, and it will be in the metaverse. It will be like that school in Dallas, the hybrid school with the, Sophia and the satellite, eyeballs walking over the kids to stimuli school, watching them, because that's where the data is. Why does this stimuli video have the kids being spied on by a satellite? Because that's the real-time data flow, right? So it's ridiculous that he's comparing this to census data, because what you're going to be doing is actually in the report that's like data as a personal asset class. I'm not sure if he did it or Deloitte, but it's a woman, she's like running, she's like jogging, and all of this giant flow of data, images, pictures, all this stuff is flowing behind her. Now, the GDPR stuff will say, oh, those bad guys, they shouldn't have your data. Google and Facebook and what, you should have your data. You should control it, because they want it in one place, in your MetaMask wallet. So, and attached to tokens and conditionalities and on the game board. They need for you to have it all in one place so that they can make the biggest assessment of the patterns. Again, but it will be anonymized. So they don't care that Becky has this particular thing going on in her life with her health situation or her job situation. They just care about all the Beckys, right? That's what they care about. And until people can get in their heads that this is what the game board looks like, we can't actually have an informed conversation about it.
To be able to understand unseen patterns in human behavior.
And it is those unseen patterns, they're patterns at a different scale. And that's what they're using the machine learning for. That's why Nicole Shanahan and Bobby want all of your health data run through machine learning to find patterns that human consciousness working at our place in the elephant, at our time scale, can't see. Now the question is, is it a cookbook? Is the thing that's trying to find the patterns doing it for something that we would all agree is to our benefit, which is going to be a hard thing to find something we all agree is a benefit, or to our detriment? That is the question.
My very first job was counting beavers from outer space. Turns out beavers make lakes, and you can see the lakes from outer space, which means you can count the beavers.
And so I would point out that this beaver counting from outer space, and he's saying this is his first project. So that's kind of crazy, because that would have been a long time ago that they had this satellite capability. So even if this thing is like, oh, I'm not doing that, I'm getting out of here, I'm going somewhere else where they don't have this. No, this outside-in robot is run from outer space. Sorry. This outside-in robot is run from outer space. Those NF trees where they're spying on villagers in the Amazon under the guise of caring about timber assets for carbon sequestration. It's to spy on you from outer space. There's nowhere that you're going that you're not going to be part of the beaver counting exercise.
And that sort of indirect indicators of what's going on within living beings is something that we've been able to do with people, to ask about social cohesion, about trust, about efficiency.
So think about that, what he's saying: social cohesion, trust, and efficiency. Think about that in the fake news narrative, right? Think about that in how we're interacting with digital media from 2020 on, and how we still are interacting with this media. They understand cohesion and breaking things apart. And a lot of us are sort of left scratching our heads saying something got broken. Something got very broken during that time. But then within these substrates, certain things cohered. And so if you listen to my talk about rhizomes, these rhizomes are all, the iris tubers are all sort of intertwined, and occasionally you have to sort of break them up and spread them around. And I think that's what happened during the lockdowns. And then unfortunately, a lot of us maybe got separated from, the people we cared about and our loved ones in this breaking apart situation, and then put in new places, right? But these are all the holons that Michaela Uluru talks about. And it is the intelligence of all the individual holons that are operating within metadata tags with anonymized data sources in spatial computing that they're feeding into the pattern recognition. But they can make coherence or decoherence at different scales depending on what they're doing to the feed. And I will mention, I did a read aloud of Feed by M.T. Anderson. It's a young adult book. It's quite prescient, and the heroine of the book is a young woman who's homeschooled, and her father is a professor of dead languages, but they're dead computer languages. It's in some near future society of climate collapse and all of this stuff, and everyone is plugged into a feed, and it's this personalized feed. But then there is this trust sort of attached, a beneficiary aspect to being on the feed. And she doesn't like the feed. And so when she interacts with consumer goods, and much of the story is about young people interacting with consumer products and having a self-branded identity, she intentionally goes into shopping areas and messes it up because she doesn't want to have a coherent brand. But then unfortunately, she has a problem with her implant that becomes, a life-threatening situation, and no one will insure her or help cover her medical coverage to address this problem because she doesn't have a coherent brand. And so even within the anonymization, there are categories of brands, and that's the holons into which you are placed. So again, the feed.
About fairness, inclusiveness. There are the indicators that we typically don't look at, we don't understand, that tell us a real story about how we're doing.
So there are indicators that we don't normally look at that tell us how we're doing. Now, again, I can't say specifically how this psychic and computer is going to work. All I can say is, looking in the spaces in between the things that I know, it seems to be that. But I do know that there are computational interfaces that you engage with where there's something more going on the back end that you are not aware of. That started with Duolingo and the CAPTCHA stuff. That there is computation that you are performing, and there's that 1,000-page book of human computation that's happening. And simply by being with a wearable as an agent in a sensing environment, we are throwing off signals that can then be parsed by some other kind of intelligence, right? Now these are the computational social scientists, but who are they actually working for? Like, is it the university? Is it the CIA? Is it some other intelligence? And what I feel like, and I keep saying, is that I sense that we are stepped down into 3D, which is a certain time scale. but that whatever is looking at the data that we're providing within a structured framework, and those structured frameworks are going to be managed through smart contracts and responsive environments, that's the game board that we're being invited, poked, prodded, encouraged, peer pressure, come on, like to get onto this game board to start emitting data that can then be parsed in this way. And then to what end? My feeling is that there's some aspect of our live action role play dynamics in social computation, because of our body being quantum processors, electromagnetic quantum processors with a soul, that there is something, that there is some other intelligence getting something out of it that we are not yet aware of. And we should be trying to figure that out, in my opinion. So I think this aspect of data showing things that we wouldn't otherwise be aware of is part of this.
The notion of understanding society to make systems better applies to all of the different areas of human life. For instance, in health, we worked during the pandemic to help people understand how to manage the pandemic better, but we've also worked for mental health to have
mental health again.
A mental health service.
They want to control your body and your cognition and your spirit.
This is better. We've been extremely successful in helping infants and young mothers with their health.
So that's the social impact fetal maternal healthcare disparities. And a lot of that is happening through UNICEF, again, aligned with the UN SDGs. And I think 3 is the health sector. It's either 3 or 4. One is education and one is health, but they're interrelated. And they want to have wearables. And in fact, in India, they were putting like tiny little lockets on babies and little wearables on them from birth. And this is connected to Aadhaar, the Digital Identity Project.
All by sort of understanding the dynamics of the situation better so that we can add little bits of information, little bits of help at just the right time.
Right. And so this is the responsive environment, is the guiding, right? And on the game board. And what I've said before is that it's like a fitness landscape towards some optimization, towards a goal. But my assessment is that we are not being asked to be participants in figuring out what key performance indicators we're working towards. And if we actually want a digital assistant minder that might mean that our smart, supportive housing first housing becomes our therapist, our parole officer, our, physical therapist, our nurse, our coach, our life coach, our confidant, that we want it to work that way. And I'm trying to think of the movie. There's a movie with the guy and he fell in love with his operating system. I think it's called Her or She maybe. And essentially this operating system, he fell into a relationship with software. And when Lynn and I were initially doing this early research into ed tech and looking at the Genie with Reasoning Mind in Texas, and there were like little elementary school children who were doing chatting with this online genie, again, the Jinn, and really having an attachment. And then when the district would discontinue the program, they would be crushed because like their friend went away, right? And we really have to think deeply about what's going on before we enter into these agreements.
We also work with transportation systems. Usually people think about this as making it more efficient, but the opportunity that communities have depends on their transportation effort. If they can't get to work, if they can't look for jobs very easily, if their kids can't get to schools.
Now, of course, Sandy Pentland knows that the future is remote work. So this is kind of a red herring about the transportation, but we know that the UN SDGs, the goal and Vision Zero is to really substantially limit independent mobility with cars and to move towards group mobility. And then a lot of the autonomous vehicles are really sort of a platform for swarm intelligence and visual data capture.
Very easily, they suffer. And so there's a human cost to where we put the roads, what we do with public transportation. And what we're doing is we're integrating those human costs into planning for the transportation that we ought to have.
Now you can see where he's talking about human costs. So all of these things have costs attached to them, and then offsetting the costs or playing with the numbers, that feeds into the social impact investments. And you can see even the word social impact, what they're after is the wisdom of the crowd, right? They're not after individuals, they're after patterns of groups as a whole. So it was always going to be for socio-technical systems. It was always going to be for social computation that they needed. So even within the lockdown discussions, it was always, do it not for you, do it for other people, right? Because it was always building the cohesion of the social net, because they were after this larger aggregation of the crowd, not the individual per se.
So transportation ought to be for everybody to make society better, not just for getting the people in the cars to work faster. A third thing is, what do you build where? Where does society invest? So one of the problems is, of course, people tend to go to the rich areas to invest because that seems to be the easiest thing to do. But that leaves all the poor communities underinvested in. And so we help people invest in those communities more efficiently, more reliably, so that they can get to the party also.
Okay, so I'll just finish. I think that's enough with Sandy. But yes, that is the bottom of the economic pyramid. That is MIT Media Lab looking to get into the global south with their sensor networks. And in my opinion, based on the patterns I'm seeing in my time scale, I sense that this has a lot to do with land-based spirituality and how our bodies resonate with the land. And I think that seems to be a key part of this. So, you know, and it's interesting, one of the images that I featured when I had my video where I was sort of pushing back against Derek Bros and the blockchain crypto gaming for the Global South kids, it was a little, a black boy. He was probably maybe 3 or 4 little, and he was sitting on a dirt hill in a field with a phone. And that was his educational opportunity, was the phone base. So that's the wearable, really. But he was sitting on a dirt mound, like alone. It was on the classroom setting. It was individual agents sitting on soil. So I think that was really interesting. But these are just some of his publications. Reinventing Society with Big Data, To Signal as Human, Wearable Intelligence, Secret Signals, Computational Social Science, Collective Intelligence, Time Critical Social Mobilization, Reality Mining for Health, Imagination in Action, Godfather of Wearables, Mining Human Behavior, A Trillion Points of Data, Understanding Conversations, Honest Signals. So, yeah, Sustainable Ecologies for Davos, Honest Signals and Reality Mining. So now I'll just pop over to my map. So this is, here is Sandy Pentland, Human Dynamics Lab, part of the MIT Media Lab Human Dynamics Group. Since 2010, working on sociometric solutions, Humanize. It's an analytics platform. And I would say the sociometrics, that goes back to Jacob Moreno, who was doing the early social networking work in like the 20s or 30s. And Pentland was working with John Clippinger, also at MIT in the Human Dynamics Group, on this open mustard seed platform, which is this trusted compute cell. And you can see on their Twitter logo that it's as above, so below with the mustard seed. And ID3 is cubed. A cube is blockchain. And then we've got, I wanted to mention, one of the test beds for Pentland was Trentino, and they in Italy. And this is the Mobile Territorial Lab, Big Data, Better Life, how big data can be exploited to improve people's life and services. And this is brought to you by ID Cubed at MIT and the telecom companies, and they were essentially doing pilot projects with couples with newborns in Trento in Italy, and doing understanding behaviors through mobile phone information. And Telecom Italia, MIT, Telefonica, and Trento Rise were the clients on that. So you don't have to have a wearable if you have a phone. And they're talking about data privacy, right? And data storage, and that you will all have your own data store. And this private data store is what they will be financializing and allowing you to have your UBI, according to Berggruen. Looking at new models of data ownership. So our question is like, do we actually want to walk onto this game board with the data ownership? And there's kind of a weird image of him at the end of the slide deck of mining human behavior from Forbes, of him sitting in a chair with a bunch of red balloons around, which seems, I'm sure if someone can parse that symbolically with the red balloons there. So Pentland was working in the Trento Rise, part of the EU. Let's see here. Okay, here's a World Economic, this is the World Economic Forum report, Personal Data, Emergence of a New Asset Class in 2011. And this is what I was saying with the woman with all these images running behind her of data. She looks like she's jogging, although she could be running away. and Clippinger and Pentland are both part of the project steering committee for that. There you go, Klaus Schwab, for the Klaus Schwab fans out there. And so the personal asset class through the open mustard seed. And then with Clippinger, we have, Clippinger is partnered with the Regen Network, which is in Great Barrington, where the Schumacher Society is. And they had been involved in permaculture and humanity cash and community currencies. So we're kind of back to the soil thing. The Regen Network is important that way. Ecological assets for the refi economy. And I think Regen, the re part, is related to the cybernetics, like second order cybernetics, where you get an outcome and then you put it back into the system to run it through again. And so we have Clippinger. Clippinger was connected to something called the Law Lab I think it was at Harvard. And the idea of software as a service and automated law. And so the law is going to go on blockchain. And that's going to be the smart contracting layer. It was at the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet Society at Harvard. And the co-director of that program was Oliver Goodenough, who is at a law professor in Vermont. And he was interested in morality, neuroscience, and the brain. And let's see, it says at the Vermont Law School, he is a professor of law. He is also currently affiliated with Stanford's Codex Center for Legal Informatics. So who else was Stanford Codex? Well, that would be Nicole Shanahan, right? She was at Stanford Codex. And it's interesting because his wife, Allison Clarkson, was a leader in the Vermont legislature. So, when I say that I think that Vermont has an inside track on tokenized participatory voting, I think we should look there, especially Martine Rothblatt is up in Vermont, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he works with Michael Levin to create the Xenobots, is up in Vermont. And Goodenough, Clarkson's husband, and Clippinger's partner on this law lab, he was he wrote a chapter called Moral Markets, the Role of Values in the Economy. And so again, I know that there are people who have certain tools and they want their tools to be the tool that's going to work. And I'm not saying that there's one solution to try to sort of neutralize blockchain governance systems, but it's hard to figure out how much can be done within the existing system without questioning the entirety of it. And my experience has been that conversations are controlled, and they're controlled in such a way that they would like for you to willingly adopt the role of a self-sovereign, which is often used in the context of digital identity, a self-sovereign agent that owns and manages your data, that can be accessed anonymously through spatial computing and smart contracts and wisdom of the crowd analysis, to accept that and feel like that is what your agency is. And at the end of the day, my question is, do we want to live in a world run on smart contracts? And I don't think we do. And even if supposedly it's for the common good or your personal good, because I think that we don't always have an agreement on what good looks like. I know that as someone who cares deeply about the environment, I don't agree on a lot of the narratives around how best to help the environment. I don't think it should be coded in nanotechnology and sensors to save the world, to save the planet. I don't think that that's right. And so the goodness is not just the narrative to get people on board, but in this idea of autopoiesis, the creation of this new emergent organism, which is something that Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, I think, that they really studied. Maturana was Chilean, a Chilean professor, and his focus was on this autopoiesis, but love. And he kept saying that love was the key. And if you look, even going back to Wrinkle in Time, right? Love wins, right? And I was talking with Joseph about this a little bit, and what he pointed out is that love is coherence. Love is integrated coherence. And access to the quantum field requires coherence. And so this idea of morality and the common good, the commoning, the tragedy of the commons, the Ostrom tragedy of the commons, it's actually vital because people, in my opinion, in this thought experiment of the psychic ant computer interfacing in a participatory universe with a quantum field, it will only work if we are coherent. And we will be more likely to be coherent if we are siloed in certain stories that make us the hero and give us the ways to be good, and we get to perform good behaviors as tokens on the blockchain, right? And then other people in the other holons, they will be performing their good behaviors that might look slightly different from our good behaviors in their holon. And then the power of our soul and our heart field in terms of keeping time in this quantum universe will be the processors for this task list that I don't know what it is yet. So anyway, hopefully that's probably a long-winded way of talking about data privacy and GDPR and how we can resolve the blockchain situation. I will say that, and I can tag this on to the end, that in 2019, a colleague and I developed language around blockchain identity used for social impact finance that the NAACP adopted at its national meeting in Detroit in the summer of 2019, that essentially said no one should be required to have a blockchain identity to access a public service or be involved in government procedures like the judicial system. It should not be required of anyone to have a blockchain identity. And I still think that foundationally, that would be the wrench in the gears to social impact finance. And the social impact finance is the crux for the human computation and getting everyone into the cybernetic loop. Because if we could outright refuse to do that, then that would be really difficult. And I think there were people in the room that day who saw that it would be very difficult. If people want to try out other resolutions, and that was the best that we could come up with at the time, it was not perfect. I've learned more since 2019, and I might have done it differently. We might have done it differently. But that's an important consideration, but you need to understand the landscape. If how you want to go about this is to set up a private digital trust of your data, then you're walking the road with Nicholas Bergruen, who would like to tokenize people as human assets and pay them a UBI. And this has been like, we're naive to think all these angles haven't been thought through well in advance. They've probably had these technologies again since the mid 80s, and they're just now coming up with a story that makes them be able to be rolled out publicly. So anyway, I hope that makes it clearer, and I'm not trying to throw shade on any particular person. It's very difficult in comment sections to make yourself clear. And so, if you're looking for a solution in law, when you see here that John Clippinger and Oliver Goodenough and are working in Harvard at the law lab of the layer of smart contracting, I would say maybe I'm not sure that you're going to get the outcome you want that way. So I'm just, again, providing the context of my thinking and how I've been sitting with this for more years than most people, and, take it for what it's worth. All right, bye. Okay, so I'm inserting the clip from the NAACP 2019 National Conference in Detroit, in which the resolution was passed opposing the requirement that anyone obtain a blockchain identity in order to access government services, including school, healthcare, or be involved in the judicial system, that sort of thing. And it was somewhat contested. You'll see there was some pushback on that, but ultimately it did move forward with no amendments. There was some confusion at the time because this is really high stakes stuff. And at the time in 2019, I think probably most people in that room, very few really fully understood what blockchain was and what blockchain identity was going to mean in terms of social impact finance. There were individuals in that space who were connected with a gaming entertainment system, a gaming educational system called Neo Media, KNEOMEDIA, managed by Frank Lieberman. And it was targeting children with behavioral issues and neurodivergent kids through, essentially, it's like a digital therapeutic, really. It's an educational platform that's functioning almost as a digital prescription. And to talk about this globally, people are like, you don't understand geopolitics. I'm like, well, I understand, like maybe we don't share the same viewpoint of what's important, but I understand that at this point, most of these systems are operating at a multinational level, right? And so Neomedia has deep roots in New York, where Frank Lieberman operates out of, and there were a lot of ties between Neomedia and NAACP in the New York City schools, especially the district that was targeting special education students. But the research that was done to essentially frame it as evidence-based interventions. And again, this is almost borderline an educational intervention, but also a mental health intervention because it was targeting kids with behavioral issues. That work that research was done out of Monash University in Australia, their Center for Health Economics. And again, health economics is the signaling coordination in the Gaia superorganism. And Monash has this blockchain technology division and their digital education research group. So they were doing this on behalf of WhatWorks, the WhatWorks Clearinghouse and the Institute of Education Sciences in the USA, which again is this evidence-based policymaking that Bloomberg is behind, where UN SDG 3 health meets UN SDG 4 education. And then you might say, well, I pulled my kid out of public schools. Like I know that they're bad, so I'm doing my own homeschooling. Well, they have their own homeschool academy and they're working with parent-teacher associations. So they're covering all of the bases, and this is an app-based educational gaming platform. It was piloted in China. Actually, the app was piloted in China in Guangdong province, and Shenzhen is in part of that province, and they were connected to Huawei's smart city pilots and impact finance. And then one of the other individuals working on this Neo World was based out of Sultan Idris Education University in Indonesia. So you've got, and then I'm not sure where James Kellett, he might have been Australian, but you've got China, you've got Australia, you've got Indonesia, you've got a lot of different places going on. You've got public school, you've got homeschool, you've got the PTA, everyone is involved. I think like Verizon was involved. This was during the lockdowns, 2020. Well, it was 2019. So actually it wasn't happening. I made the map during the lockdowns. It was prior to the lockdowns, but there was a big push at the time during the lockdowns for getting Chromebooks into the hands of low-income students in New York for their education. So I just want to provide this as the context for the next clip, which is about 10 minutes, which is about passage of this resolution opposing the requirement of blockchain media to access public services. Now, that doesn't mean that no one's allowed to have a digital wallet. Like if you're some person and you want to trade your crypto and have your own wallet, there's nothing legally against that. but it is the public service angle. And when I say the way the public-private partnership situation will work, the government provides access to you through your digital identifier. They are managing the digital identifier, and that will be linked to public benefit services. The investments in those services, the social impact interventions, will come through foundations and venture capitalists, and that will probably start to take on the form of the UBI. And then the implementation of the different interventions into your life will happen through nonprofits, including faith-based institutions. So all of them are involved. Like, if you want to sort of point the finger at, like, no, it's the government, no, it's the capitalists, no, it's the whole package. That's why we have to look at this at the whole package, and we need a new way of talking about it, in my opinion, that doesn't rely on the old reality tunnels, because the old reality tunnels are not going to serve us to actually unpack what spatial computing, Web3, blockchain, impact signals intelligence is about.
I hope everyone heard our chairman. He has spoken and he's asked that you enter quietly, cease all conversation, and take your seats.
Before I turn the chair over to Ms. Robinson, I want to thank the Resolutions Committee, the members of the Resolutions Committee who are seated here on the dais, and the staff of Resolutions. Stand up, y'all. Stand up, everybody. This is the hardest working committee in the NAACP. They've done a yeoman's job. What you're looking at is 2 days of work, considering over 150 resolutions that you submitted to us, which means that all of them didn't get in the packet. If you haven't received an explanation of why your resolution didn't get in the packet, you will. Resolution in the packet. Therefore, be it resolved that the NAACP opposes any state or federal legislation that would require an individual to create a blockchain identity in order to receive any public service or benefits, including but not limited to education, healthcare, addiction treatment, behavioral health services, law enforcement, housing, and/or food and nutrition. Be it further resolved that the NAACP will engage in community education efforts to communicate to the public about the structure, function, benefits, and inherent risks of blockchain technologies. Madam Chair, I move adoption.
There's an amendment to this resolution, Mr. Chair.
Tiffany.
Ms. Tiffany Lanzam.
She's from.
Good morning. Microphone 4, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name.
That is fine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Linzan of the Brooklyn branch, Region 2. I, as a data analytics engineer and scientist and current researcher in quantum computing, have suggested the amendment, as we are not thinking holistically as to how this information technology can actually be used to protect us in the future for our currently insufficient algorithms used in quantum computing.
What is the, what's, where, what, where?
They want to know.
What and where?
Ms. Linzam.
So more specifically, this amendment is targeting current tracking that could be used for discriminatory financial segmentation and also tracking via the web.
Where does your amendment go?
The amendment is within the first clause, be more specific after digital identity management.
The committee accepts. They wanted to make sure that they understood your translation.
So the statement more specifically is to work with organizations such as the National Institute of Standards and Technology or Data and Society Research for cross-device tracking, digital targeting and advertising, digital customer segmentation, and discriminatory financial profiling. Yes, it is written.
That's what she
has it written here.
that is what is written.
Okay. Microphone 1. Delegates,
I'd like to, hi.
delegates, excuse me, 1 minute. Delegates, there is difficult to see people at the mics because we have some movement. Is it about time for lunch or something?
I'd like to speak respectfully against the amendment because it makes this too specific. Right now, we have blockchain identity technologies being piloted in Africa against our most vulnerable communities. It does not capture, this amendment says specific to cross-device tracking, digital targeting and advertising, digital customer segmentation, discriminatory profiling. It does not capture blockchain identity systems in education, which was the original intent and the concern of why we proposed this legislation. I think that all of those fall under the original resolution, and to make it more specific will only weaken it.
Thank you. Microphone 4.
This will be her.
Thank you. Understood, and I would include education. However, I do believe that the entire resolution itself is restrictive. I don't think it thinks about the security vulnerabilities if we do limit ourselves to completely disregarding the technology. We currently find ourselves getting rid of or being scared of technology that we need to be more collaborative in and be more involved in the organizations to craft what we want.
So she gets one more time.
Okay, microphone 1, you get one more.
And then we're gonna move.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the security issues, right now, blockchain identity system and blockchain technologies are being marketed as secure. A recent study found that the 43 of the top blockchain companies that had investments put into them did not deliver whatsoever at all. This is new technology. It's the new Theranos. We need to be very cautious. It's fine for products not services, products, but not for people. We should not be using blockchain identity systems to track people. What happens at the very early stages is that those behaviors I was talking about, the use of it in preschools and education and measuring the kinds of things that are happening, it never gets deleted. It's immutable. You can have false information that gets put on your blockchain and it never gets erased. So I would propose leaving it as is without that amendment. I think there might be future resolutions to address ways that it might be beneficial in supply chain and other kind of services, but not for human beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had delegates. We have had 2, we have comments, we've had 2, the maker of the motion, the amendment has spoken twice, we've had 2. So we are ready to prepare to move and have you to vote on the amendment. We are prepared to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, raise your voting card. Thank you. All of those opposed to the amendment? The amendment loses.
The amendment failed.
The amendment fails.
On
the motion, all of those in favor of the motion, raise your voting card.
motion to adopt
All of those in favor of the motion to adopt
the resolution.
resolution number 1 on the information technology, raise your voting card. All of those opposed? Oh, God.
Now, you need to explain to them that they voted down the amendment.
Okay. Delegates?
The amendment failed.
Delegates? We had the information technology resolution presented before us. We had an amendment presented. We had discussion on the amendment. We had the person who wrote the amendment to talk twice. We had 2 comments against. You voted that amendment down. We are now voting on the amendment as presented. On the resolution as presented. Delegates, we are voting on the resolution as presented. All of those in favor of the information technology resolution as presented, raise your voting card. Those who oppose to the amendment, resolution is adopted.
I can say resolution, not amendment.
Mr. Chair. Now, the resolution was adopted.